The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning Delia Slater was already on a westbound stage with nothing but a carpetbag, a photograph, and a name she could not stop saying under her breath like a prayer she was no longer sure God was listening to. Clara, Clara, Clara. The name of her sister, the only family she had left in the world, and the name of the woman who had gone west to the New Mexico territory 8 months ago with a man named Harlan Beach, a cattle broker from Albuquerque who had promised her a house with a porch and a life that did not smell of the Chicago stockyards where their father had spent his years and finally his lungs. Clara had written faithfully for the first 4 months, letters that smelled faintly of sage and described sunsets that painted the sky in colors Delia had no names for growing up in the gray smoke of the city. And then the letters had stopped. And then the telegram had come, not from Clara, but from a postmaster in a town called Redemption Wells, and it had said only that a woman matching Clara Slater's description had been seen in the area, and that her welfare was in question, and that if she had kin they ought to come. Delia had packed before the telegram finished cooling in her hands. She was 24 years old, she had worked as a seamstress and a bookkeeper's assistant since she was 16, and she had never been further west than the Indiana state line. She had $62 sewn into the hem of her skirt, a bone-handled knife that had belonged to her father, and an anger inside her chest that she kept confusing for grief, because she did not yet know which one was going to win. The journey took 11 days. She crossed through Kansas and into the territory on a stage that smelled of unwashed wool and tobacco, that lurched over ruts and dry creek beds and once, outside of a place called Flat Rock, was held up briefly by 2 men in kerchiefs who took the pocket watch of the drummer sitting across from her, and then rode off into the scrubland looking almost bored. She kept her hand on the knife in her carpetbag the entire time and did not sleep until they were rolling again. Redemption Wells announced itself as a town that was still deciding whether it wanted to exist. The main street was packed dirt and wooden storefronts in various states of completion, half of them with facades that extended 2 feet above the actual roofline, as though hoping to convince passers-by that the buildings were larger than they were. There was a general store, a livery, a saloon with a painted sign that had been bleached nearly colorless by the territory sun, a sheriff's office with a tin star nailed beside the door, and at the far end of the street, a hotel called the Coronado that had 4 rooms and a dining table that served whatever the cook felt like making that day. Delia climbed down from the stage on legs that had forgotten what steady ground felt like, and stood in the afternoon heat, looking at all of it with eyes that were dry and determined and privately terrified. The postmaster's name was Willard Fitch, a small, wiry man with ink-stained fingers who seemed to operate from a back room of the general store and who greeted Delia with the particular combination of relief and discomfort that people display when someone has actually responded to a distress call they sent half hoping it would be ignored. "Miss Slater," he said, shaking her hand with both of his. "You made good time." "Where is my sister?" Delia said. Willard Fitch pulled at the collar of his shirt. "Well now, that is the question, isn't it? What I know is that a woman came through here about 6 weeks back, asking if anyone had seen Harlan Beach. She gave her name as Clara Beach, which I took to mean she was his wife, and she looked." He stopped and rearranged his words. "She did not look well, Miss Slater. She had a bruise on her left cheekbone, and she was thin in the way people get thin when they haven't been eating right. She asked about Harlan Beach, and when I told her I hadn't seen him in 2 months, she went to the saloon, and after that I don't rightly know." "The saloon," Delia said. "I know how that sounds. But you have to understand, the saloon is where most of the information in this town lives. People talk there. People hear things. It wasn't necessarily—" "I understand," Delia said. "And after the saloon, she left heading south along the Silo Road. I haven't seen her since. But a ranch hand who came through 3 weeks ago, fella named Torres, he said he'd seen a woman matching that description at the Sawyer Ranch about 12 miles south. Working there, he thought, or staying there anyhow." Delia felt the tight band of anxiety around her chest loosen, exactly one fraction of an inch. Staying somewhere was better than not being seen at all. "How do I get to the Sawyer ranch?" she asked. "I can arrange a horse," Willard Fitch said, in the way that people say they can arrange something when they mean it will take 2 hours and cost more than it should. What it cost was $3, and what it took was the remainder of the afternoon. And by the time Delia was actually mounted on a bay mare named Hester and pointed south along the Silo Road, the sun was falling toward the mesa, and the shadows were lengthening across the scrubland in a way that was beautiful and slightly unnerving in equal measure. She had ridden before, not often, but enough to manage, and she kept Hester at a steady walk because the mare seemed to prefer it, and because the road was unpredictable in the fading light. She reached the turnoff for the Sawyer Ranch as the last light was going orange and deep, and she could see the ranch house from the road, a solid low structure of adobe brick with a wooden porch and a fire burning somewhere inside that threw warm amber light through the windows. There was a barn to the west with a lantern hanging in the open doorway, and the sounds of horses settling for the night. There were 2 horses tied at the rail outside the house and a dog, a big tawny thing, that raised its head from the porch steps and regarded her arrival with measured interest, but did not bark. Delia dismounted and tied Hester beside the other horses and stood for a moment collecting herself. She had spent 11 days on the stage and 1 anxious afternoon on horseback, and she was tired in a way that went down to her joints, and her grief and her fear had been sitting in her chest so long that she could no longer tell them apart from the normal weight of breathing. She straightened her back, tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, and walked up to the porch and knocked. The door opened, and the man standing in it was not what she expected, though she could not have said afterward what she had expected. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in the way that outdoor work creates, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were a particularly striking shade of gray-green that she noticed immediately, and then felt slightly irritated at herself for noticing. He was wearing a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he had a coffee cup in one hand, and he was looking at her with an expression of genuine surprise mixed with something more cautious. He looked to be around 30, maybe a year or 2 younger than that. His face had been weathered by sun and wind, but it was a good face, an honest face, and there was a steadiness in the way he held himself that she recognized as the posture of someone who had learned to absorb difficult things without staggering. "Help you?" he said. "I'm looking for my sister," Delia said. "Her name is Clara Slater, or possibly Clara Beach. I was told she may have come this way." Something shifted in his expression. It was not alarm exactly, but it was a careful attention, the kind that meant the information registered and he was deciding what to do with it. "You'd better come inside," he said. His name was Noah Sawyer, and he had ranched this land for 6 years, since his father died and left it to him and his younger brother Eli, who had since gone east to study law and sent money back when he had it and letters more reliably than that. Noah ran beef cattle on 300 acres of territory grassland and employed 2 hands, a middle-aged Mexican man named Rodrigo who lived in the bunkhouse with his wife Consuelo, and a younger man named Pete who was 21 and enthusiastic, and not yet entirely reliable but getting there. He poured Delia coffee and set a plate of cornbread on the table in front of her without asking if she wanted it, which she appreciated because she had not eaten since morning and could not have brought herself to ask. "Clara Beach," he said, sitting across from her with his own cup. "Yes. She came here about 5 weeks ago in the evening, much like yourself. She was on foot. She'd walked from the Silo Road about 3 miles, which in that condition he stopped. She was not in good condition when she arrived, Miss Slater. Willard Fitch said she had a bruise." "She had more than one," Noah said, and his voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not. Harlan Beach had been. He was not kind to her. Delia set down her coffee cup because her hands had begun to tremble and she did not want them to. "Is she here?" she asked. "No," he said, and she saw him register the way the word landed on her. He continued quickly. "She is not here, but she is safe. She stayed here for 2 weeks while she recovered her strength and her footing. Consuelo, Rodrigo's wife, she looked after her. Clara left 3 weeks ago for Santa Fe with a family who was passing through, a family named Garza, good people. She knew them slightly from her time at the beach property. She went to Santa Fe because there is a woman there who runs a boarding house that takes in women in particular situations, and a doctor there who would not ask the wrong kind of questions. She left me a letter for any family who might come looking." He rose and went to the shelf above the fireplace and took down an envelope and brought it to her. Delia recognized Clara's handwriting on the outside. "Delia," it said, in Clara's careful looping script, as though she had known, as though she had trusted that Delia would come. She opened it and read it there at the kitchen table with Noah Sawyer sitting quietly across from her, giving her the privacy of his silence. The letter was 2 pages. Clara said she was sorry for frightening her. She said she had been too ashamed to write sooner, too ashamed of what she had let happen, or what she had not been able to stop from happening, and that distinction in the letter, that careful, uncertain grammar around the blame, made Delia's chest ache with a sharpness that had nothing to do with the distance between them. Clara said she was healing. She said the territory was strange and vast, and that she had been lonely in it, but that the loneliness of Santa Fe, where she at least had her own room and no one raising a hand to her, was an entirely different species from the loneliness she had known in Harlan Beach's house. She said she hoped Delia would not come all this way for her sake, and she said she knew Delia would come anyway, and she said she loved her. Delia folded the letter and pressed it flat against the table with both palms. She did not cry, not then. She had used up her capacity for crying somewhere around the Kansas state line, in the dark of the stage, listening to the drummer snore and watching the flat black land scroll past. What was left in her now was something cleaner and harder and quieter. Relief mostly. The particular exhausted relief of finding out that the worst thing had not happened, that the worst thing was still bad but survivable, that Clara was in Santa Fe and she was alive and she was healing. "Thank you," she said, "for taking her in." "It wasn't any kind of heroism," Noah said. "She knocked on my door, I opened it. A lot of people would have sent her on." He looked at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the fire in the hearth shifted and crackled, and the dog, who had come inside at some point without her noticing, put its head on her knee. "Where are you planning to stay tonight?" he asked. She had not thought that far ahead. She had been moving so hard toward the answer to the question of her sister's whereabouts that everything beyond that answer was blank. "The hotel in town," she said. "The Coronado. It's a 12-mile ride back in the dark," he said. "You're welcome to stay here. Consuelo keeps a clean spare room. She'd feed you in the morning and you could head to Santa Fe with an actual plan instead of riding blind in the territory dark." Delia considered this with the portion of her brain that was not pure exhaustion. It was a reasonable offer from a man who had taken in her injured sister without asking questions, and had kept a letter for her family against the possibility of their arrival. The dog on her knee seemed to trust him. The coffee was good. "That's very kind," she said. "I accept." Consuelo Rodrigo was a woman of 50 with sharp black eyes, and a quality of warmth that she dispensed in practical rather than sentimental ways, which meant that she showed Delia to a clean room with a real bed and a wash basin with fresh water, hung her carpetbag on the back of the door, and said in accented but precise English that breakfast would be at sunrise, and that she should sleep because she looked like she had been dragged here by something rough. Delia thanked her and meant it with her whole tired heart. She slept for 10 hours without dreaming. In the morning the ranch was already moving when she came out to the kitchen, the sounds of it reaching her before she was fully awake, hoofbeats and the distant calling between men and the smell of cattle on the cool morning air mixing with the coffee smell from the kitchen. Consuelo fed her scrambled eggs and fried potatoes and thick slices of bread with butter and did not make conversation, which was exactly correct. Noah came in from the yard while she was finishing her second cup of coffee, smelling of horses and early work, and he washed his hands at the basin and sat across from her with his own plate in the natural, unself-conscious way of someone in their own home. "If you're going to Santa Fe," he said, "the Garza family went by way of the Rio Piedras stage road. Takes about 2 days on horseback or 3 on a slower pace. I can draw you a map." "You're very organized about sending women to Santa Fe," she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice and was not entirely sorry for it. He looked at her steadily. "I am organized about helping people who need help get to where they're going safely," he said. "If that constitutes a pattern you find suspicious, I cannot control that." She was quiet for a moment. "I apologize," she said. "That was unfair. You've been on the road 11 days looking for your sister and you arrived last night to find she was somewhere else entirely," he said. "A little bit of unfair is allowable." The directness of that undid something small and tightly wound in her. She looked down at her coffee cup. "She's really all right," she said, and her voice was smaller than she intended. "You saw her. You spent 2 weeks with her. She was frightened and hurt and she needed time and rest," he said. But underneath all of that she was clear-eyed. She knew what had happened to her and she knew she needed to leave it behind. That kind of clarity is its own kind of strength. Delia nodded slowly. "She was always the brave one," she said. "Between the two of us, I was the careful one, she was the brave one. You rode across 2 states and into unfamiliar territory alone to find her," he said. "I think you may have underestimated yourself." She looked up at him then, and for a moment the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the horses made a sound and Pete called something to Rodrigo and Boots crossed the porch boards. But in the kitchen there was just the soft sound of the morning and this man looking at her with those gray-green eyes that did not look away. "Who are you, Noah Sawyer?" she said, not entirely meaning to say it aloud. He seemed to consider the question seriously, which was not the reaction she expected. "I'm someone who ended up here," he said finally. "Came to this land with my father when I was 19, thought I'd stay a year and ended up staying for everything after. My father built the first part of this house. I built the rest. I run cattle because the land is good for it and because I don't know how to be someone who doesn't have dirt under his fingernails." He paused. "And some days that's enough of an answer and some days it isn't. What does it feel like on the days it isn't enough? Like something is missing that I don't have the right shape to describe," he said. She held that for a moment and then she said, "I know that feeling." She spent that day at the Sawyer Ranch. Not because she had decided to delay her trip to Santa Fe, but because Hester the mare had thrown a shoe sometime in the night and needed the farrier who came through on Tuesdays, and that day happened to be Monday. This was the kind of complication the territory regularly provided, and Delia had already learned that fighting the territory's complications was like arguing with the weather. She helped Consuelo in the kitchen in the morning, not because she was asked to, but because staying busy was how she kept her emotions at a manageable elevation, and because Consuelo's quiet, pragmatic company was soothing in the way that certain kinds of competence always are. Consuelo taught her how to make red chili sauce from the dried peppers strung up along the kitchen wall, and Delia taught Consuelo a more efficient way to fold the dough for the small pastries she made in the afternoon. And they did not talk much, but they understood each other well enough. In the afternoon, she walked out to where Noah was mending a section of fence along the north pasture, not entirely planning to end up there, but ending up there just the same. The land stretched away from her in every direction in a way that should have felt isolating and instead felt like something else, like being very small in a very large and honest space where nothing pretended to be what it wasn't. "Does it ever stop being strange?" she asked him, meaning the landscape. He was working a strand of wire through a post, and he didn't look up immediately. "It stops being strange and starts being what normal looks like," he said. "Takes about a year, I think. After a year you start to feel strange when you go back east, when the horizon closes in and the sky gets small." "My sister loved the sunsets here," Delia said. "She wrote me about them." "They are the genuine article," he said. Did you talk to her, to Clara, while she was here? He straightened and turned to face her, resting an arm on the fence post. Some, he said. Mostly Consuelo talked to her, but in the evenings over supper she talked. She told me she'd come west because she wanted something real. She said that specifically. Something real. She thought Harlan Beach was real because he was direct and sure of himself. She didn't know the difference yet between a man who is sure of himself and a man who is sure of his right to take what he wants. The anger moved through Delia like a current. Where is Harlan Beach now? Last I heard he moved operations to Tucson. He has business there. He paused and his voice took on a deliberate flatness. The law in this territory is a developing situation. There isn't much protection for women in Clara's circumstances. I want you to know that I did consider riding to Tucson. I want you to know it. But you didn't. Clara asked me not to, he said. She said the most important thing was that she got clear of him, not that anything happened to him. She said violence would just make it take longer for her to feel safe. Delia thought about her sister saying that and felt a wave of something that was almost more love than she could contain. That sounds exactly like Clara, she said. She's a thoughtful woman, he said. You're alike in some ways, different in others. Different how? He looked at her for a moment. There was something careful in the way he did it, like he was choosing his words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. She's softer at the surface, he said. The courage in her goes all the way down, but the surface is soft. He stopped. I'm what? She said. You're all the way honest straight from the outside, he said. There isn't much soft about the way you lead, but I don't think that means there isn't anything soft. I think it means you keep it further in. She did not know what to say to that. She was not accustomed to being read accurately by people she had known for less than 24 hours. It made her feel slightly exposed in a way that she did not entirely dislike. You're very observant for a cattle rancher, she said. And you're very perceptive for someone who hasn't slept properly in nearly 2 weeks, he said, with the very faintest edge of something that might have been amusement. She found herself smiling briefly, for the first time since Chicago. The sunset that evening was everything Clara had tried to describe and still not quite describable. Bands of deep orange and rose, and a purple that deepened toward the mesa as the stars began to appear in the east, one at a time and then in rushing quantities. More stars than she had ever seen in her life. A sky so full of them that the darkness itself seemed like an afterthought. She sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea Consuelo had pressed into her hands and watched it happen, and Noah sat in the wooden chair beside the door with his hat on his knee, and they watched it together without saying anything for a long time. I understand why she wanted to come here, Delia said eventually. The territory gets under your skin, he said. Is that why you stayed? Just because it gets under your skin? I stayed because this land is mine now in the way that matters, he said. Not just on paper. It's in my hands and my back and my understanding of what weather looks like when it comes in from the north. I can't give that back. He paused. I stayed because there is something here worth building. She looked at him. The last of the light was catching the side of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the way he held his hat between his hands. Something moved through her that she did not name because naming it seemed premature and she was a careful woman. I should get to Santa Fe as soon as the mayor's shoe is fixed, she said. Yes, he agreed. Clara needs to know I'm here. She does. There was a pause. You could stay a few extra days, he said carefully. After you get back from Santa Fe, if you needed to, before the stage back east. She looked at him and he looked back at her with that steady gray-green gaze, and neither of them said anything else about it. But the offer sat in the air between them like something deliberate and specific. I'll see what Clara needs, she said. He nodded once, as though that was a satisfactory answer, and they watched the last of the sunset finish its work together. The farrier came the following morning, a stocky red-faced man named Henderson who fixed Hester's shoe and charged Delia 50 cents, and told her the road to Santa Fe was clear through to the junction, after which she should bear left and not right regardless of what the markers said, because one of them had blown sideways in a spring storm and hadn't been straightened since. Noah rode out with her to the junction, not because she asked him to, but because he said he was going that way anyhow. And she did not probe that claim because she appreciated the company and the territory felt somewhat less vast with another rider alongside. He knew the road and pointed out landmarks, a rock formation that looked like a seated man from certain angles, a dry creek bed that ran with water 3 weeks out of the year and was called locally the Brief River, a mesa to the east that changed color through the day as the light moved across it from burnt red in the morning to something almost lavender in the late afternoon. At the junction, he reined his horse, and she did too, and they sat for a moment in the warm morning wind. "Take the Garza name when you get to Santa Fe," he said. "People know them. It'll get you directed to the right places." "I know how to find my way," she said, but not unkindly. "I know you do," he said. "I just like having something useful to say when I'm about to watch someone ride away." That landed somewhere unexpected. She looked at him and he was looking at her with that same directness, not performing anything, just being exactly what he was. "I'll come back through on my way east," she said, "to return the horse." "Hester will be glad to hear it," he said. She turned Hester south toward Santa Fe and did not let herself look back. And if she found herself thinking about the exact shade of his eyes for the better part of the next hour, that was purely the sort of thing that happened to a person in unfamiliar landscape, she told herself. It was novelty. It was the territory, getting under her skin. Santa Fe was larger than Redemption Wells and smaller than Chicago and more beautiful than either, spread across a high desert plateau with the mountains rising behind it, and the afternoon light giving everything an amber quality that made it look slightly like a painting. The boarding house was on a quiet street off the main plaza, and it was run by a woman named Miriam Dowd, a widow of 60 with silver hair and an air of absolute unshakable competence. Clara was sitting in the garden when Delia arrived, and she looked up from the bench where she had been reading and went very still for a moment, and then she stood, and Delia crossed the garden in 3 quick strides and they held on to each other without saying anything for a long time. "I told you not to come all this way," Clara said, her face pressed against Delia's shoulder. "You told me you knew I would," Delia said, "which is different." Clara laughed, a real laugh, wet at the edges and held on tighter. She was thinner than Delia remembered, and there was a faded yellow mark at her cheekbone that was the last remnant of what had been a significant bruise, and she moved with a slight carefulness that spoke to other healing, but her eyes were clear. Noah Sawyer had been right about that. Clear and present, and underneath everything, still Clara, still the brave one. They sat in the garden for 3 hours and talked. Clara told her everything, the parts that were in the letter and the parts that weren't, and Delia listened without interrupting until Clara was done, and then she said, "You are not to blame for a single moment of it." "I know that," Clara said. "Mostly I know that. Some days I know it less." "On the days you know it less, you remember I said it," Delia said, "because I am the careful one and I have thought about it thoroughly and I am certain." Clara smiled, the particular smile that had always meant she was grateful in a way she didn't have words for. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Tell me about Noah Sawyer." "He was helpful," Delia said. "He was a great deal more than helpful to me," Clara said. "He fed me and protected me and never once made me feel that his help required anything in return. That is rarer than it should be." "He seems—" Delia stopped. "Delia," Clara said, looking at her with a specific kind of sister attention. "He seems like a good person," Delia said. "He is," Clara said. "He also has very nice eyes." "Clara." "I am just noting what is factual," Clara said serenely. They stayed in Santa Fe for 4 days. Dr. Vargas, who Miriam Dowd directed Delia to, confirmed that Clara was healing well and recommended she remain in Santa Fe at least another 3 weeks before attempting any kind of long travel. Clara said she intended to stay through the summer and then consider her options and that she was not going back to Chicago. Not yet, possibly not ever. She had spoken to a woman at the boarding house who did fine mending work for the wealthy families in the area, and there was the possibility of real income in that. "You could stay," Clara said to Delia. "In Santa Fe. There is room here." Delia thought about the prairie and the stars and the junction where the road split two ways and a man sitting on a horse watching her ride away. "I need to return Hester," she said. Clara's expression was composed and gently triumphant, and she said absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. Delia set out on the third morning of May back toward Redemption Wells, following Henderson's instructions in reverse, and then the route Noah had shown her. And it felt less strange this time. The landscape, more like something she was moving through and less like something she was lost inside. She noticed the rock formation that looked like a seated man and felt a small, unreasonable pleasure at recognizing it. She arrived at the Sawyer ranch in the late afternoon, and Noah came out of the barn when he heard Hester in the yard. And when he saw it was Delia, he stopped walking for just one moment before he continued. And in that one moment something in his face rearranged itself from ordinary to something more guarded and deliberate, the way a person arranges their face when they are trying to contain a reaction they didn't plan for. "How is she?" he asked. "She is healing," Delia said, dismounting. "She is strong and she is clear and she is staying in Santa Fe for the foreseeable future. And she asked me to tell you that she is grateful to you for everything and that she considers you one of the finest people she met in the territory." Something moved in his face at that. "I'm glad she's well," he said. Consuelo appeared at the kitchen door and called Delia's name as though she had been expected, which perhaps she had been, and told her supper would be ready in an hour and that her room was the same. Delia stayed. She had not precisely decided to stay. She had decided to return the horse, and then she had decided to stay for supper, and then she had accepted the room, and in the morning it had been easy to say one more day, because she told herself she had not yet asked Noah about the particular piece of the ranch's business that had been on her mind. The business was the account books. On the second evening, sitting at the kitchen table after supper while Consuelo and Rodrigo had retired and Pete was in the bunkhouse, she had found herself looking at the ledger Noah had left open on the shelf and had noticed, with the practiced eye of a bookkeeper's assistant, 3 entries that didn't reconcile. "May I?" she had said, gesturing. He had handed it to her with the mild expression of a man who was not accustomed to having his ledger examined but who was not particularly threatened by the prospect. She spent 20 minutes working through the columns. "Your lumber supplier has been charging you for grade A boards and delivering grade B," she said. "You've been overpaying by about $11 on each of the last 4 orders. And this calculation here," she pointed, "is simply a maths error. You've been undercounting your own stock profit by about $30 over the last 6 months. Noah looked at the page and then at her. "You're certain?" "I worked as a bookkeeper's assistant for 4 years, she said. "I am quite certain." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I owe you dinner." She laughed, actually laughed, not the polite social kind but a real one, and he smiled in response, and it transformed his face entirely, made it open and younger and more purely itself. "Show me the rest of it," she said. They spent 2 hours at the table with the ledger between them, Delia working through the figures and Noah explaining the ranch's structure and the agreements he had with the suppliers and the buyers. And she asked questions that were specific and practical, and he answered them with the same precision. And it was one of the most interesting evenings she could remember having in years. Because of the ledger. Because of the way he talked about his land, the way his voice changed when he explained which pastures were best in what season and why, the way he knew this place down to its individual qualities. "You love it," she said. "The ranch." "I do," he said. "Is that boring?" "No," she said. "It's the opposite of boring. Most people I know in Chicago tolerate what they do. They do it because it pays or because it was available. You actually love what you do. That's," she searched for the word. "Rare," he offered. "Enviable," she said. "I was going to say enviable." "What do you love?" he asked. "Not what you do, what you love." Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. She sat with it for a moment. "Numbers," she said. "The way they are honest. They don't tell you what you want to hear. They just tell you what is true." She paused. "And Clara, and the smell of new fabric. And apparently she hesitated and then said it because she was a woman who had been called all the way honest, apparently the territory at sunset which I did not expect. He was looking at her across the table and the lamp between them was burning low and the house was quiet, and he said, without looking away, "Delia." Just her name, just that. "Yes," she said. "I don't want to say something that makes you feel you should leave before you're ready to," he said carefully. "But I also am not a man who is good at pretending not to notice things." "What have you noticed?" she said. "That I would like you to stay longer," he said. "Not because you're useful with a ledger. Not because Consuelo likes your company, though she does. Because when you're here the ranch feels like it has a different quality. A better one. And I don't know what to do with that except say it plainly." Delia held his gaze. The careful part of her, the precise bookkeeper's eye part, was noting that this was a man she had known for less than 10 days in total, that she had ridden out here for her sister and not for herself, that she had a life in Chicago, however gray and stockyard-scented it might be. The other part of her was noting the quality of this kitchen at night, and the steadiness of this man, and the way her own chest felt less constricted here than it had in years. "I'll stay another week," she said, "and then I'll reassess." "That's a very bookkeeper's answer," he said. "I am a very bookkeeper's woman," she said. The week passed in a way that felt both very ordinary and, in retrospect, significant at every point. She helped Consuelo in the mornings and spent the afternoons doing something she had not quite planned, which was learning the ranch. Noah did not arrange this formally. It simply happened that he was riding out to check the south pasture cattle, and she asked to come. And then the next day he was looking at the condition of the north fence again, and she was already in the yard. He showed her things without condescension, the way you show someone things when you genuinely want them to understand, the quality of different grasses and what they meant about water in the soil, the signs a calf was struggling, the way the weather came in from specific directions at specific times of year. She found she had a retention for it that surprised her and did not entirely surprise her. She had always been good at systems, at understanding how things connected. A ranch was a system, interconnected and logical once you learned the language of it. "You're going to know more about cattle than me by the end of the month," he said one afternoon from his horse, watching her examine a bit of grass at the creek bank with an expression of focused inquiry. "I'm still learning the vocabulary," she said, standing. "But I have the syntax." He laughed. "I don't know what that means, and yet I believe it completely." There was a day in the middle of the week when a group of Apache men rode past on the road north of the ranch, 4 of them on horses, not threatening, just traveling, and she watched them from the porch and felt the weight of something complicated and unresolved in the air. She had read things in Chicago, newspaper things, about the territory and its conflicts, about the Apache people and the army and the ongoing wretched machinery of what the government was doing to the land and the people who had always lived on it. She had not known what to expect of it in reality, having never been in the territory, and the reality was more complex and more sad and more humanly specific than the newspaper things had allowed for. She asked Noah about it that evening, and he did not dismiss the question, or give her the cheerful dismissive version that many people in the territory seemed to have adopted as a defense. "It's wrong," he said plainly. "What is being done, the reservation policies, the land seizures, it is wrong. I know men who will argue with me about that, and I have stopped arguing back because I cannot make a wrong thing seem less wrong by discussing it long enough." He was quiet for a moment. "My father bought this land legally, meaning through the American systems that exist, and I don't know that the land was the American government's to sell in the first instance. I think about that sometimes." "What do you do with that thought?" she asked. "I try to be a neighbor who does not take more than his share," he said. "I try not to participate in the active wrong. I know that is insufficient." "I don't know what sufficient looks like from where I'm standing." He looked at her. "Does it bother you that I can't give you a cleaner answer?" "It would bother me more if you pretended you had one," she said. He nodded slowly. "You are a very honest person to talk to," he said. "You make it easier to say the true things instead of the acceptable ones." On the 6th evening of her second stay, she was sitting on the porch in the long golden hour before sunset, a cup of coffee going cool beside her, a letter from Clara in her hands that had arrived that morning by way of Willard Fitch in town. Clara was still healing. Clara was learning the mending work. Clara had made friends with another woman at the boarding house named Esperanza who had her own complicated story and who made Clara laugh. And Clara had written at the end of the letter, in her careful script, "I hope you are still in Redemption Wells. I hope you have figured out why." Delia folded the letter and looked at the mesa going copper in the afternoon light. Noah came out of the house with 2 cups of fresh coffee and swapped hers without asking and sat down and looked at the same mesa. "I've been thinking," she said. "All right," he said. "About the books," she said. "The ranch books. You have 3 years of accounts that need reconciling properly, and at least 4 supplier agreements that should be renegotiated based on what I've seen of the market prices. It would take a person who knows what they're doing approximately 2 weeks to sort it through, and after that there should be a system in place so the errors don't compound." He turned to look at her. "Are you proposing to sort my accounts?" he said. "I'm proposing to stay 2 more weeks and sort your accounts," she said. "In exchange for room and board and a fair wage for professional work." "Delia," he said. "It is a professional arrangement," she said, "and I am very good at it and you need it." "It is an excellent professional arrangement," he said. "And yes, I need it. And you are using it to stay here without having to explain why you want to stay here." The copper light was on the mesa and on the porch and on his face, and she thought, as she had been thinking for 6 days with increasing frequency and specificity, that she had never met a person who made her feel this seen and this comfortable and this accurately understood at the same time. "Perhaps both things can be true," she said. "They absolutely can," he said. "I accept the professional arrangement." "Good. And Delia?" "Yes. I'm glad you want to stay," he said. "However, you need to explain it to yourself." She looked at him and something in her chest, the grief part, the careful part, the part that had been braced for so long that it had forgotten what it felt like to release, very quietly and with great relief, let go. The 2 weeks of accounts turned into 3, not because she was slow, but because the scope was larger than she had initially assessed, and because Redemption Wells itself kept providing reasons to stay. She found a rhythm at the ranch that suited her in ways she had not anticipated. The mornings were productive, and the afternoons were interesting, and the evenings were the best kind of company she had known. Conversation over supper that covered everything from territory politics to the mathematics of cattle prices to the books they had both read at different times in different places, finding the overlaps and the gaps with the pleasure of people discovering shared territory. She wrote to Clara 3 times in those 3 weeks. Clara wrote back 4 times, the additional letter being one she sent mid-month just to say she was doing well, and that she hoped Delia was doing better than well. She wrote to her landlady in Chicago explaining that she had been delayed on a family matter and would be returning somewhat later than originally planned. Her landlady wrote back with mild disapproval and the implicit suggestion that the room could not be held indefinitely. Delia read this letter and found that it produced much less anxiety than she would have expected. On a Wednesday evening in the middle of the 3rd week, Noah saddled 2 horses without explaining why and told her to come with him, and she did, and they rode northwest as the sun went down to a piece of elevated ground, a long natural ridge that looked out over a valley she had not seen before, a wide quiet bowl of land with a river threading through it that caught the last light and held it like hammered metal. "This is the edge of my property," he said. "This ridge. I come here when I need to think." She looked at the valley and understood why. "What do you think about when you come here?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "The future," he said. "What this place could be. What it is now and what it might be with the right kind of care over the next years." He turned to look at her. "I've been thinking different things recently since you've been here." She met his eyes. The sun was fully gone now, the sky deepening through indigo toward its nightly extraordinary state of stars. "What have you been thinking?" she asked. "That I want to know what you want," he said. Not what Clara needed, not what brought you here. What you want, Delia Slater, from this life, from wherever you end up. What is it? She thought about Chicago and the gray light and the tight, careful life she had built there, functional and safe, and profoundly lonely in a way she had mostly not let herself articulate. She thought about the 11 days on the stage with her grief and her fear and Clara's name on her lips. She thought about arriving here and finding, instead of the worst thing, something she had not been looking for. I want to be in a place where I am useful and where I am known, she said. I want work that is real, and I want to stop feeling like the horizon is somewhere I'm not allowed to look at directly. She paused. And she stopped. Tell me, he said quietly. I want not to be alone in this particular way. I have been alone, she said. I have been alone in a room full of people for a long time, and I am tired of it. He reached across the space between their horses and very carefully, very deliberately, took her hand. His hand was large and roughened by work and absolutely steady. I would like to court you, he said, properly and plainly. Not because you fixed my accounts, though I will be grateful for that for the rest of my days. Because you are the most honest and the most interesting and the most genuinely present person I have met in this territory. And when you are here, the ranch is what I always wanted it to be, which is a home, not just a property. The stars were coming out above them, the territory sky doing its nightly impossible thing, and she was on a ridge above a river valley holding the hand of a man who had asked her what she wanted and listened to the whole answer. Yes, she said. Court me. He turned her hand over and pressed his mouth to her knuckles very simply, and she felt it in her whole chest. Delia, he said. Yes. Which one was yours, the grief or the name on your lips? She understood what he was asking, the real thing underneath the words. He was asking which piece of her had come here, the one that belonged to Clara's story or the one that belonged to her own. Both, she said. They came in together, but one of them is letting go now. He nodded like a man receiving something he had been hoping for without having allowed himself to fully believe in. We'll go slow, he said. As slow as you need. I don't actually think I need that slow, she said. And he looked at her and she saw the smile breaking in him, the real one, the one that made him look entirely open, and she smiled back with her whole face. They rode back to the ranch in the full dark, and it was entirely different from the kind of dark she had feared in the territory when she first arrived. Not isolating but enclosing, the stars so present and so close that the dark between them felt almost incidental. The courtship was exactly what he had described it as, proper and plain, and without any pretense about what it was. He called on her in the evenings with deliberate intention, bringing conversation and occasionally flowers from the desert, brittle bush, and the bright red penstemon that grew along the creek, making her laugh with the specificity of the gesture against the landscape. She accepted his arm on the walk to look at the evening star, and she leaned into the warmth of him at the ridge above the valley and one evening on the porch, watching a summer storm build out over the mesa. When he turned to look at her, she turned at the same moment to look at him, and the space between them had become so small that the solution was evident to both of them simultaneously. He kissed her carefully, his hand very gentle at her jaw, and she kissed him back without any carefulness at all, both of her hands gripping the front of his shirt, and when they separated she was breathing hard and so was he, and the storm was sending its first advance wind across the porch boards. Well, he said. Indeed, she said. He laughed and so did she, and the lightning broke white over the mesa and the rain came down. She wrote to Clara and told her everything. Clara's response came back in what seemed like record time for the territory postal system, 2 weeks, and consisted of 3 pages of enormous delight and several pointed observations about Delia having figured out why she was still in Redemption Wells, and a final line that said, I knew from the moment he kept my letter for you. A man who expects the people who love someone will come for them is a man who understands something true about the world. Delia read that sitting at the kitchen table and felt the truth of it sink all the way in. She wrote to her landlady in Chicago and asked her to pack and ship the contents of her room to the address of the Sawyer Ranch, Redemption Wells, New Mexico Territory. The landlady's response expressed significant surprise. Delia was not particularly troubled by this. There was a moment in September, 3 months after Delia's arrival, and 6 weeks into what was openly and mutually understood to be a courtship leading somewhere specific, when she rode into Redemption Wells with Noah for the weekly supply run, and felt for the first time that the town had the quality of a place where she lived rather than a place she was passing through. She knew Henderson the farrier by name, and he waved to her from across the street. She knew Willard Fitch's habits and the exact corner of the general store where the decent quality thread was kept. She knew which days the best produce came in, and which days Redemption Wells held its informal market beside the water trough. She knew, perhaps most significantly, the faces and the names and the general situations of the people who lived there, which was the kind of knowledge that was not about visiting. It was about belonging. Noah noticed her noticing. He was watching her from a mild sideways angle as they tied the horses outside the general store. "You look like someone who's gotten comfortable," he said. "Is that visible?" she said. "Only if you know what you're looking at," he said. The question of her permanent future came up not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a natural continuation of 100 smaller conversations. They were sitting on the porch one September evening, the air finally cooling to something pleasant after the long territory summer, and she was reading a letter from Eli Sawyer, Noah's brother in the East, who wrote occasionally with updates about his law studies, and who had recently sent a letter addressed specifically to her, welcoming her to the ranch's orbit with a warmth that was clearly Noah's family trait. "Eli likes you," Noah said. "He said so in his letter to me, not just yours." "He seems like a good man," she said. "He is going to be a good lawyer." "He is," Noah agreed. "He wants to work on land rights, the Indian Territory cases." A pause. "He has strong feelings about the injustice of it. He gets that from somewhere," she said, looking at him. Noah turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Delia," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it plainly because I don't know another way to be with you and I don't want to start now." She set down Eli's letter and gave him her full attention. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "Not because it is the practical next step, though it is the practical next step. Because I love you, and because I want this ranch to be yours as much as it is mine, and because the future I see from the ridge above the valley has you in it at every point. And because—" He stopped and she saw something very genuine and slightly unguarded move through his face. "Because you came here carrying someone else's name and your own grief, and you let me see which one was yours. And I know that was not easy, and I know you did not plan it. And I have been in love with you since approximately the second morning you were at this table, and you found my ledger errors before I had finished my coffee." She looked at him for a long moment and let the weight of it come all the way in. She had come here for Clara. She had ridden 12 miles in the territory dark for Clara, and knocked on a stranger's door for Clara, and found the letter that said Clara was safe and healing. She had done all of that, and somewhere in the doing of it, life had provided something she had not known to ask for, something that the grief and the careful loneliness had made almost unimaginable. She had come with Clara's name on her lips and her own grief in her chest, and he had asked which one was hers, and she had told him, and he had held the answer carefully and built something from it. "Yes," she said. "Noah Sawyer, yes, of course, yes." He exhaled in a way that suggested he had been more nervous than he showed, which she found entirely endearing, and he reached across and took her hand, and she turned hers to hold his back. "I have a ring," he said. "It was my mother's. Eli kept it. He sent it 3 weeks ago." She looked at him. "3 weeks ago. You've been carrying my answer in a ring for 3 weeks." "I wanted to find the right moment," he said with some dignity. "Noah," she said, "you planned ahead." "I thought about the ridge," he said. "I thought about the storm. I thought about the table over the ledger. I couldn't decide." "So you chose the porch," she said. "You looked peaceful," he said. "I didn't want to make it too much of a production." She leaned forward and kissed him, warm and certain, and felt his free hand come up to the side of her face with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything. He produced the ring from his breast pocket, a small gold band with a single seed pearl that had been his mother's and his grandmother's before that, and he put it on her finger on the porch of the ranch he had built on the edge of the territory with the stars coming out over the mesa. She wrote to Clara that night by lamplight. 2 words at the top, he asked, and then 3 more. I said yes. Clara's response, when it came, was the longest letter she had ever written, 6 pages of pure joy, and ended with a postscript that said, "I am coming to the territory for the wedding or I am never speaking to you again, and since both of us know I cannot maintain silence for any reasonable period of time, please expect me in November." The wedding happened on the 15th of November, 1882, on a morning that was cold and clear with the sky an absolute uncompromising blue. Willard Fitch, who turned out to hold a Justice of the Peace commission from the territorial government that he had never fully advertised, performed the ceremony in the ranch yard with the mesa in the background and Consuelo and Rodrigo and Pete as witnesses. Clara arrived 4 days before, and the 2 sisters sat up late on 3 consecutive nights, talking and laughing and crying in approximately equal measure. And Clara met Noah with the assessing eyes of someone who had seen him at his best and wanted to confirm that her best assessment still held. On the second evening, she found a moment alone with Delia in the kitchen and said, "He looks at you like you are the answer to a question he has been asking for years." "I know," Delia said. "And you look at him like you have finally found something worth being careful about," Clara said. Delia looked at her sister. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Truly, truly," Clara said. "I have good days and harder days. But I am safe and I am building something of my own and the harder days are getting further apart." She paused. "And I have you, 12 miles away instead of 2 states, but you." 12 miles is nothing on a horse," Delia said. "I know," Clara said. "I walked 3 of them." They both laughed, and Delia reached across the table and held her sister's hand, and the lamp on the table between them was warm and steady. The ceremony was brief and felt entirely right. She stood beside Noah in her best dress, which Consuelo had pressed that morning with a flat iron heated on the stove, and said the words she meant with her whole self. And when Willard Fitch said that Noah Sawyer could kiss his bride, he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with a tenderness that was also entirely honest, nothing performed about it, and she felt the last thread of the braced and careful armor she had worn for years slip entirely away. Clara cried. Consuelo produced a handkerchief from somewhere and cried quietly and efficiently. Pete looked moved and slightly uncomfortable about it. Rodrigo shook Noah's hand with both of his and said something in Spanish that made Noah's face soften into that open smile. They had a wedding dinner at the long table with enough food that Pete ate 3 plates and looked only slightly embarrassed about it, and they drank a bottle of wine from the Coronado Hotel's limited but genuine selection, and the evening was exactly the kind of warm and full that a person builds toward without always knowing that's what they're doing. Clara stayed 2 weeks. She and Delia rode out to the ridge above the valley on her 3rd day at the ranch and stood side by side looking at the country spread below them, the river catching the autumn light, the silence that was not really silence but the sound of everything being exactly itself. "I understand why you stayed," Clara said. "I stayed for work reasons initially," Delia said. "Delia, I stayed because the horizon here is different," she said. "And because he asked me which one was mine and then waited for the real answer." "That's a good reason," Clara said. "It is, isn't it?" Clara went back to Santa Fe with the Garza family who had agreed to take her, and she wrote faithfully twice a month. And life at the Sawyer Ranch settled into the rhythm that it would hold, the daily work and the evening conversations and the particular quality of the territory through its seasons. Spring turning the desert into something briefly and extravagantly alive, summer burning long and dry, autumn coming in cool and clear, winter bringing the kind of cold that made the stars seem closer. Delia took over the accounts formally and found that the ranch's financial situation improved in the 1st quarter, by a margin that made Noah look at the revised figures with an expression somewhere between relief and genuine admiration. She also began corresponding with several other ranchers in the area about their bookkeeping after word got around through Willard Fitch's informal telegraph of general conversation. And within 6 months, she had 3 regular clients, enough to constitute a real professional practice run from the kitchen table of the Sawyer Ranch. "You are now the busiest person on this property," Noah said one October morning, watching her sort through 3 different sets of accounts. "I am compensating for your decades of numerical negligence," she said. "I thought that was resolved. It was resolved. Now I am preventing it from recurring in the wider community." He put coffee beside her elbow and leaned down to press his mouth to her hair. "I married the most competent woman in the territory," he said. "You married the most competent woman you had access to at the time," she said. "The territory is a large place." "I stand by my assessment," he said. Eli Sawyer came to visit in the spring of 1883, having completed his law studies and taken a position with a firm in Denver that had territory cases. He was 26, lean like his brother but darker-haired, with Noah's same quality of directness and a quick intelligence that was immediately evident. He arrived looking tired from the journey and spent the first day sleeping and eating Consuelo's cooking and regaining something of himself. And on the second day, he and Delia sat at the kitchen table while Noah was out with the cattle and worked through the land title documents for the ranch together. "You should formalize the claim under both names," Eli said. "Married women have limited property rights under current territorial law, but a joint registration on the title is enforceable and it gives you standing if anything were ever to be challenged." "Your brother's name has always been on it," she said. "And now yours should be too," Eli said simply. "It's right, and it's legal." She looked at this young man who had sent a ring from Denver in advance of a proposal he had trusted would be accepted, who had written her a welcoming letter before he had ever met her, who was now sitting at her kitchen table making sure she had legal standing in her own home. "Noah said you were going into land rights cases," she said. "Indian Territory cases specifically," he said. "The things being done in the name of American progress are going to require a long legal reckoning, and I intend to be part of it." His voice had the steady certainty of someone who has found their specific purpose and intends to serve it. "I'm glad you're going to be a lawyer," she said. "I'm glad my brother has someone who can do long division faster than he can," Eli said, which was not exactly a return compliment but was clearly affectionate. He stayed for a month, and it was good, the 3 of them in the ranch with Consuelo and Rodrigo, the house full in the way it had always had the potential to be. Noah and Eli worked together easily, the way brothers do when the time and distance between them has refined rather than eroded the relationship. In the evenings, they told stories about their father and Delia listened, and added him to her knowledge of this family she had married into. The man who had built the first part of the house she now lived in, who had brought his sons to the territory when they were young and given them roots in this strange, vast land. "He would have liked you," Noah said one evening after Eli had gone to bed, the 2 of them sitting at the fire. "How do you know?" she asked. "He respected directness above everything else," he said. "He used to say that a person who tells you the true thing even when it's inconvenient is worth 10 people who tell you the comfortable thing." He looked at her. "You tell me the true things." "Always," she said. "I know," he said. "I love that about you. I love it specifically and exactly, and I want you to know I know it is a gift you give me." She looked at the fire for a moment and then at him. "I was very lonely before I came here," she said. "Not just since Clara left, before that too. I had been performing the function of a person without being fully inside it. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said. "Here I am fully inside it," she said. "Every morning I wake up and I am in the right place. That is not something I had before." He reached across and took her hand in both of his. They sat like that for a long time, the fire burning down and the territory night enormous and present outside the windows, and it was exactly sufficient. Clara came for Christmas that year. She came on the stage and arrived in Redemption Wells looking well, and carrying a basket of sweet bread she had learned to make from Esperanza. And she and Delia embraced on the street in front of the general store, while Willard Fitch watched from his doorway with the expression of a man who has overseen the important junctions of several people's lives and found the work quietly satisfying. Christmas at the Sawyer Ranch was a fire and food and Consuelo's tamales, and a bottle of good bourbon that Pete had invested in more thoughtfully than he invested in most things. And Rodrigo played the guitar in the evening and Consuelo sang. And Clara sat beside Delia by the fire and Delia sat beside Noah. And it was the kind of Christmas that sets the template for all Christmases afterward. "Tell me something true," Clara said to Delia quietly under the music. "I am happier than I have ever been," Delia said. "I know," Clara said. "It shows." "Tell me something true," Delia said back. Clara was quiet for a moment. "I think I might stay in Santa Fe permanently," she said. "I have been offered a position at a dressmaker's shop, a real position with real wages and the possibility of eventually having a stake in the business. And I have a life there now, a small one but mine." "Then stay," Delia said. "Stay and build it. You don't mind that I won't be closer." "You are 12 miles closer than Chicago," Delia said. "You are in the same territory. I will see you." Clara nodded, and her face had the clear quality that Noah had described in the early weeks, the clearness that was its own kind of strength. "I am going to be all right," Clara said. "You were always going to be all right," Delia said. "I just needed to come and tell you that in person." Clara laughed and leaned against her shoulder, and the guitar played on. In the spring of 1884, on an April morning when the desert was doing its brief extravagant thing with wildflowers covering the Bajada below the mesa in a carpet of yellow and deep red, Delia told Noah that she was going to have a baby. She told him at the kitchen table, which seemed appropriate for the important conversations of their marriage, and he sat very still for a moment with an expression she had not seen on his face before, something more unguarded and stunned than his usual steadiness. "Are you certain?" he said. "I am a person who is always certain before I say things," she said. He came around the table and pulled her up out of her chair and held her, his face pressed against her hair, and she felt his breath go unsteady for a moment before he gathered himself. "Delia," he said. "I know," she said. "This ranch," he said. "This is going to be, he or she is going to have a very good horizon," she said. He pulled back to look at her face, and he was smiling with his whole face, the full open version, and his eyes were bright. "A very good horizon," he said. "Yes, exactly that." She wrote to Clara and she wrote to Eli, and the letters came back so quickly they must have been written before the recipients had finished reading, both of them full of joy, and in Eli's case, also full of legal advice about inheritance law that she appreciated, and Noah read with the specific expression of a man who is very fond of his brother and occasionally exhausted by him. The baby came in November, and it was a boy. Noah held him in the kitchen by the fire, this solid, loud, opinionated small person who had arrived into the territory with an immediate and comprehensive set of opinions about everything, and his face had the quality of a man who has understood something he did not have language for before this exact moment. "Henry," Noah said, the name they had agreed on, for Noah's father, who had built the first part of this house and brought his sons to this land. "Henry," Delia confirmed. Consuelo was weeping openly and not trying to hide it. Rodrigo had gone outside and then come back in and was standing by the door with an expression of great dignity and slightly glistening eyes. Pete had gone to get Willard Fitch, who had offered at some point to bring the doctor from town and had been pressed into service as a general messenger, and the two of them appeared in the doorway with the doctor right behind them, who confirmed that everyone was fine and healthy, and then accepted a cup of coffee and Consuelo's congratulations pastry, and sat at the kitchen table, because there was nowhere better to be. Clara arrived 2 days later on the fastest horse she had ever ridden, and held her nephew for an hour without letting him go, which Henry tolerated with surprising patience for someone who had been alive for 48 hours. "He has your eyes," Clara told Delia. "He has Noah's nose," Delia said. "The nose is a very good nose," Noah said from the other side of the room. "Nobody is arguing about the nose," Delia said. Clara stayed for 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks the ranch was full in every sense, full of people and warmth and noise and the particular beautiful chaos of a new life adjusting to its existence. Delia watched Noah with Henry in the mornings, when he would come in from the early rounds, and hold the baby with the ease of a man discovering. He was naturally suited to something he had not known he was going to be called upon to do, and she felt the particular quality of happiness that is not excitement but depth, the kind that comes from having built something real. Pete rode into Redemption Wells one afternoon that week, and came back with a length of blue ribbon that he had bought at the general store and tied to the porch railing without explaining himself, which was the territory's version of a congratulatory gesture and touched Delia considerably. Life at the Sawyer Ranch expanded. Henry grew from the specific tyranny of a newborn into the delightful unreasonable tyranny of a toddler, with strong opinions about horses, and a fascination with Rodrigo's guitar that Rodrigo encouraged with great enthusiasm, and his mother watched with the combination of amusement and mild concern, appropriate to a child who wanted to put every new thing in his mouth. Delia's bookkeeping practice grew too, enough that she had begun taking on a 4th regular client, and she wrote to Eli suggesting that some of the territory's smaller ranches might benefit from a cooperative accounting service, and he wrote back with 6 pages of legal framework for it, which was Eli's way of saying he thought it was an excellent idea. Clara's dressmaking position in Santa Fe became a partnership when the original owner retired in 1885, and Clara's letters became infused with the particular energy of someone who has found the work they were made for. She visited 3 times a year, and each visit she seemed more fully herself, more settled in her own story, and Delia watched the healing happen over time the way she had learned to watch the territory's seasons, in the accumulated evidence of many small moments rather than one dramatic change. There were harder things too, as there always are. The summer of 1885 brought a drought that lasted long enough to threaten the South pasture cattle, and required selling stock at lower prices than anticipated and 3 months of genuinely difficult calculation about what could be managed and what needed to change. Delia and Noah sat over the accounts together night after night, working through the numbers with the same clarity and honesty they brought to everything, finding the path through without pretending it was easy. "We're all right," she told him one evening when the numbers had finally resolved into something survivable. "We are," he said, "because you kept the books right when other people's were falling apart. Because you kept faith with the land when other ranchers were selling off," she said. "The land is still here. We work from what's here." He looked at her across the lamp and the accounts and the quiet house and the sleeping child in the next room. "You know what this place is?" He said. "Tell me," she said. "It's what I thought it could be when I came here at 19 and stood on the ridge and looked at the valley," he said. "I thought, if I do everything right, if I work it honestly and keep faith with it, it could be this. A real home, people in it who chose to be here." He paused. "I couldn't have gotten from there to here alone." "Neither could I," she said. He reached across the accounts and the lamp and took her hand, and she held it back, and the territory night was outside the windows with its incomprehensible quantity of stars, and the house was warm and solid around them. In the spring of 1886, Delia found herself going to tell Noah something at the kitchen table for the 2nd time, and this time he knew the expression before she said the words. "Another one," he said. "Another one," she confirmed. He was around the table faster this time, and the hug was just as complete, and outside Henry was in the yard with Rodrigo learning about the horses he had never stopped being fascinated with, and the mesa was doing its morning colors, and the desert was beginning its slow annual process of producing flowers from what looked like nothing. The second child was a girl, born in October 1886 on a day when the mesa was going all its colors at once in the autumn light. They named her Lily, for no reason except that it suited her, and Henry, who was 2 and 3 months old and had opinions, pronounced her small with the authority of someone who had recently been the smallest and was pleased to no longer hold that distinction. Eli came from Denver to meet her and stayed for 3 weeks, during which he and Delia did an extensive reorganization of the ranch's title documentation, and Eli bounced Lily in one arm while reading land rights briefings with the other in a way that demonstrated the particular facility of a person who has learned to be useful in multiple directions simultaneously. "You're going to be a good father someday," Delia told him. "I'm working on the prerequisites," he said, in a way that suggested there was more to that answer, and sure enough, in the winter of 1887, he wrote to tell them that he was engaged to a woman named Josephine Crane, a schoolteacher in Denver who was apparently able to match him in both legal argument and directness, which he presented as the primary qualification. They went to Denver for the wedding, and it was the first time Delia had been back east of the territory since she had arrived, and she found that Noah had been right. The horizon felt small, and the sky felt pressed down, and she wanted the open spaces back. She also loved Josephine immediately and completely, recognizing in her a similar quality to what she hoped she possessed herself, which was the willingness to be entirely honest even when it was inconvenient. "You're the one who kept me informed about the ring," Delia said to Eli at his wedding dinner. "I wanted you to know someone was thinking ahead," Eli said. "It was very good information to have," she said. Clara came to Denver for the wedding too, coming up from Santa Fe with Esperanza, who had become her closest friend and business partner in the dressmaking shop. And the 3 women, Delia and Clara and Josephine, found each other at the dinner table and talked for 2 hours about everything. And Delia thought that her family, which had been her and Clara and the gray Chicago light, had expanded into something she had not known to want but could not now imagine the shape of the world without. She and Noah traveled back to Redemption Wells from Denver on the westbound stage, the same direction she had come from 4 years ago, and she watched the land change from the tamed and sordid landscape of the settled East to the open and particular landscape of the territory. And when they crossed into New Mexico and the sky opened up, she felt herself exhale. "There it is," she said. "There it is," he agreed. She was holding Lily on her lap, and Henry was pressed against the window of the stage with the focused interest of a child cataloging the land outside, and Noah's shoulder was warm against hers, and the stage was rolling west toward the ranch and the mesa and the ridge above the river valley. "I came out here not knowing what I was going to find," she said. "I know," he said. "I found Clara and I found you and I found," she gestured slightly inadequately at all of it. "This." "What was the grief?" he asked. The question that had been between them from nearly the beginning, asked now in the private shorthand of people who have built a language together over years. "It was mine," she said. "It was about being alone in the way I was alone, but it's not mine anymore in that same way." "I asked which one was yours," he said, "and you were asking whether I was here for her story or my own," she said, "and the answer was both, and then the grief became something else." "What did it become?" She looked at him in the afternoon light of the westbound stage, this man who had opened a door when someone knocked, and who had kept a letter against the hope of family, and who had asked her to stay not out of want for something but out of abundance of it. "It became the reason I was in the right place at the right time," she said. "The grief got me on the stage. Clara's name got me to the territory, and then you were there." He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and the stage rolled on west, and outside the window the territory spread itself out in every direction, vast and honest and entirely itself. Henry fell asleep against the window. Lily made a small contented sound and settled against Delia's chest. The mesa appeared on the horizon, familiar now as any loved thing, going its colors in the late afternoon. They came home to the ranch on a Thursday evening, and the dogs met them in the yard, and the smoke was already going from the kitchen chimney. Consuelo having known their return time and having prepared accordingly. The house sat solid and low and full of light in the early dark, the kind of house that has been lived in well, that holds its warmth not just from the fire inside but from everything accumulated in it over years. Noah lifted Henry out of the stage, and the boy woke immediately and demanded to go see the horses before supper with the absolute conviction of a child who knows what matters. And Noah carried him on his shoulders toward the barn with the natural ease of it. And Delia stood in the yard holding Lily and watching them go, and felt the territory around her, enormous and present, the stars beginning to appear in the east. The grief had come west with her, pressed tight in her chest alongside Clara's name. The grief had been hers, and it had been real, and it had carried her to this doorstep and deposited her here, and then very slowly, over time and work and honesty and love, it had transformed into something that looked nothing like grief anymore. It looked like this. This yard and this sky and this smoke and these horses and this man turning back from the barn doorway to look at her across the dark and smiling the full open smile that she had loved since almost the beginning, the one that made him look entirely himself. She raised a hand to him across the yard. He raised one back. The stars came out in the territory sky in their incomprehensible numbers, and Lily made a small sound, and Noah came back across the yard to stand beside her, and they looked up together at all of it. "Good evening, Mrs. Sawyer," he said. "Good evening," she said. And it was. In the years that followed, the Sawyer Ranch became what it had always had the capacity to be. Not just a property, but a home in every possible sense of that word, the kind that neighbors speak of when they mean a place where things are done right. Eli and Josephine came from Denver twice yearly with their own children in time, a boy named Robert in 1889 and a girl named Agnes in 1891. And the ranch at Christmas was the organized happy chaos of a family that had been built from intention and care and the specific willingness to be honest about what mattered. Clara's dressmaking business in Santa Fe became the best in the territory, and she hired 3 women beside herself in Esperanza. And when Delia visited her, the shop was exactly the kind of place Clara had always deserved to inhabit, warm and precise and full of color. Clara did not remarry, and Delia did not push her toward it, because what Clara had built for herself was whole on its own terms, and that was everything. Henry grew up on the ranch the way his father had intended, with the land in his hands and his understanding, knowing every acre of it. And when he was old enough, he had his father's steadiness and his mother's precision, and the combination was something particular and fine. Lily was her mother's daughter in the way that mattered most, which was the way that meant she asked the true questions and waited for the real answers. And Delia, who had come to the territory in the spring of 1882 with her sister's name on her lips and her own grief in her chest, who had knocked on a stranger's door in the dark and found something she had not known she was looking for, lived the kind of life that the careful woman she had always been had not quite let herself imagine possible. Full and honest and grounded in the best land she had ever seen, right where she was supposed to be.